Yeah, welcome everybody to this episode of Truth and Fiction. This is episode 2, I believe, and we are talking today about John Wyndham's 1951 novel, Day of the Triffids. I'm joined today with Blake Jackson and Fat Mandate, Synthesist. Which one should I be using, Fats?
Fat Synthesist.
Fat Synthesist, two dear friends from the old days. What did you think of the book, Blake?
Oh, I loved it. I think you were the one who recommended it to me years ago. And I think since then I've went through it probably 3 or 4 times. It's one of the fiction books that I like to return to and kind of just get a taste of that world, you know? So really, I guess it's hard to say what something that's written a long time ago that's so relevant now is what I've taken from it every time that I've gone through it.
What about you, Fatty? I think we had a conversation earlier where you had trouble trying to find relevancy to the modern day with this book.
Oh no, it's not that I've had trouble finding relevancy. It's that it's not one of those books where sometimes when you watch a movie or something or go through a story, it's like a clear, predictive programming type of thing. Whereas this, it seems like something, it's still relevant, but the pieces don't fit neatly together. It's not something like where, oh, there's the virus that gets released in all these movies and we see the same pattern occurring in real time. Whereas this one, it's like a story that hasn't been sort of played out in reality yet. It's sort of like a story we're not living through yet, if that makes sense.
Yeah, for those of you at home who have not read it, I would encourage you now to stop this and go read it. Also, the audiobook is available on YouTube currently. I don't know anything about the copyright or whatever, but the synopsis is essentially 99% of the population is blinded by mysterious comet debris, and the few sighted people that remain have to battle a crumbling society and this new, weird, mutant man-eating plant that was developed over the years. And there's a backstory there, but I won't tell you about that. I would encourage you to read it. Some of you may be familiar with the story. Danny Boyle used the opening for, 24 Hours Later? What was his zombie film?
28 weeks later? That was
28 Days Later. So 28 Days Later, the opening of that film was inspired by the opening of this, Day of the Triffids.
That's interesting.
Yes, if you watch The Walking Dead, the intro of The Walking Dead, it's very similar to this intro too, except they took it into zombie direction. But it's the same opening where the main character wakes up blinded, right? Wakes up from the hospital.
So we find ourselves in a society of blinded people. And this rings true to me because I feel like that I'm living in a similar sort of metaphorical rendition of that with this concept we're getting familiar with is the red pill plateau. In that if you can't see what's happening now, by now, I don't think you ever will. You look around us and the quote-unquote blind, out of desperation, have reverted to a more animal way of thinking. In our society, we see it as people becoming more emotionally centered. Like our entertainment and our news is becoming much more fear-based. The political climate has deteriorated significantly. And everything seems to be getting worse. And we see that in the Triffids. Society is collapsing because its people are no longer physically able to preserve it. And I'm wondering, is this the case for us in our society, except that people are no longer mentally or emotionally able to support our society?
Definitely. I like the connection you made there with more of an animalistic kind of mindset, almost definitely like sheep needing to be herded, needing to be, coddled into an explanation of circumstances that are going on. It seems that you don't need much to tell a sheep where to go and what to do. They kind of just, oh, okay, you know.
Well, and because they're prey animals, they're a specific type of animal where they're always on the lookout for predators, and they're so instinctually crazy on the lookout for predators that any sort of security that you can give them as the sheep herder, they're going to follow you because they want to be safe. And so society is turned into this wild madhouse of fear, stress, and anxiety, and there's no outlet for it, except for the outlet of give us more power, speaking as the government or the ruling class, give us more power and we'll keep you safe.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's almost like when have you guys ever seen those videos of sheep farms from the aerial view?
Oh yeah.
And how isn't it freaky just how looking at it from, bird's eye, it's just really interesting in how they kind of all just follow that same pattern. And if you pay attention to humans, we kind of do the same thing with a lot of the structures we have, like highways, roads, and all you need to do is put yellow tape here. People will just instinctively just kind of stay within the lines.
Yep.
January 6th, they got the worst insurrection in history, walking in a straight line between the two ropes. And it's always a few stragglers, but eventually all roads lead to the same place.
Well, and sheep tend to follow the one ahead of them, the one that comes before, and so on and so forth. And there's always that front sheep who's following the herder, or they're all running from the dog. And that's what we're seeing now, is herders just sort of push us in a direction towards safety, the safety of the barn, because there's predators out there, there's bad disease out there, there's Flurona 20.
And can you trust the herder, right? Because are you going back to the farm or are you going to slaughterhouse?
Yeah, exactly.
You don't know any difference.
Is the herder having mutton tonight for dinner or what? We don't know, because we just know one thing, which is this way to safety.
Speaking of that, I've always wondered. So yeah, okay, the lead sheep. Okay, I get it. The sheep way in the back, but that third or fifth or even sixth, seeing that they're walking into the slaughterhouse, it's just the conversation doesn't even change. Maybe we should go the other direction, or maybe we should break out or do something other than walk into this line. I just kind of wonder, do they communicate? And it seems like that's almost the case now. How can you not see the direction we're walking into? And the guy right ahead of you kind of breaking out saying, no, this is the wrong way, guys. These aren't safe. I got sick, or my mom got sick. These aren't the way. It's kind of like the sheep behind them are no.
Keep going forward. Well, you're number 6 in line. You've got 6 ahead of you, but 40 behind you, all pushing in that direction. It takes so much fortitude. And we're speaking a little bit metaphorically here, to be able to push back, being 6 in line. No, we gotta go. There's a cliff over there. There's a slaughterhouse over there. They're cutting us into meat chops. And it's difficult because all the sheep behind you are no, man, you're crazy. Until they get up to your position, and by then it's too late.
And the thing is, they don't want to see. They're blinded.
They're blinded by fear.
Because if they do see, then their story changes. Their whole worldview changes, it shatters. Then you're caught open, you don't know what to do, because beforehand, everything made sense. Just listen to the authorities. You don't have to think too hard. They'll tell you what's good. They'll tell you what to do. Just follow them. But then that leads to your complete ruin. And it's not something like a black swan event, which is something random that comes out of nowhere. You see it coming at you very slowly. That's one of the key themes in Day of the Triffids, because that meteor, that comet light show, it's heavily hinted at openly that it's probably a satellite weapon that was used to blind everybody. And in combination with the Triffids, which people saw that they're attacking people, yet they still kept growing it. And we have one of the characters that talks to Bill when he was working in the Triffid plant. They were discussing, making this theory about maybe Triffids are thinking creatures. Maybe they talk to each other. And what does that mean for humanity? If these are thinking creatures that can talk and adapt to humanity, and are they a competitor? And this character, he's wondering to himself out loud to Bill, I was think about this, maybe it's true. And then Bill asks him, well, why don't you write a book about it? Why don't you release it? And he says, well, look all around us. There's this giant business around us, so why would I deny profits right now and ruin it? It's not time to do that yet. And that leads to their ruin.
Because in the book, they talk about how these Triffids, they have these little sticks at the base of their stems that they use to patter and strike against the
bowl.
It creates it's almost like Morse code. And so the theory, Walter, I believe his name is, has this theory that it's language and that they're communicating with each other. And he makes a statement that if we are competitors with these Triffids, the only thing we have over them is sight. So if I were to put money on it between a Triffid and a blind man, I'd put my money on the Triffids, because these Triffids are adapted to an existence without sight, and humans are adapted to an existence with sight. If you take away the sight from the human, Triffids become the apex predator.
And the Triffids, they suspiciously target the human being's eyes.
Yes.
And that's a common theme. It's is that just random, or is there something else going on here? And we see the same thing where your pattern recognition is constantly fought against, so that you don't think too hard about these things, so you can't, so that your survival mechanism is completely distorted, or you are useless, or you are a sheep. And it's like, oh, these Triffids targeting our eyes, that's just a coincidence. There's something to see there. Don't worry about that.
Yeah, one thing I found interesting that Josella said, and it kind of ties in what you were saying about the communication, is how she made the connection between them being more like an insect than a plant in their collective goal. You know, how kind of, she said something about pretty much how the individual insect will work towards the goal of the hive. And I'm paraphrasing, but that's kind of interesting to me how the Triffids, along with them knowing exactly how to attack a human being the most efficiently, also kind of like they just knew when to attack. That's the part that I found interesting, because I think them knowing how to injure a human, I think that can be learned over time with their interaction with human, because the book said that several people have been injured by these things as, you know, pet plants in their gardens and whatnot. And I'm sure other people other than Bill had work-related accidents, you know, handling them. So I can see them learning in that sense. But the knowing that the quote-unquote meteor storm happened and then that everyone were blind at that point, it kind of leads me to think, like, how did they know it was time to strike?
Yeah. And there's another sort of metaphorical association here. I'm going to jump ahead between the Triffids and this new, slow, lurching, all-consuming ideology coming about right now from the radical left, and quite frankly, the centrist left is getting a lot of it too. It's feeding on the putrid corpses of the dead until the flesh of all mankind is spent. This, what is laughingly referred to as wokeness, but it's really neo-Marxist critical theory. It's a new making, it's Luciferianism. This idea of changing, inverting everything that society was built upon. And that's what I see. The Triffids are a great representation of what's happening in academia, what's happening in companies, in the forms of adapting sort of this race-centered sensitivity training, or even mandates. You know, for whatever reason, it's this slow growing, a non-individualistic collectivism that these Triffids, to me, could represent. And no matter where you go, this new ideology will pursue you, like these Triffids do for people that gather in any place. The Triffids go to them. They're after living, breathing humans.
I'm not sure we covered this yet, but the Red Pill Plateau about should we help the blind, so to speak. And I think what's interesting is that the blind and the Triffids are, in this story, are separate entities, separate groups.
Yes.
But in reality, they're both the same. They're combined into one. Because it's the blind, slow-moving people who are reaching out, who are in need of your help, trying to navigate the world. They are the same people as the ones, as the Triffids, who are shooting out at your eyes, trying to blind you at the very same time. That's what's frightening about reality. It's that it's the same person doing that. They can't see, but they don't want you to see either. They're also reaching into your pocket for help, but they're only going to slow you down.
Yeah, because they're either unable or unwilling to help themselves. They reach out to you. You need to help us because you can see / you make more money than I do, or you work harder than I do, thus making more money. Therefore, you need to help me. Pay your fair share. And this goes to Coker's whole thing in this book. He was, at the very beginning, this altruistic thinker fighting for the benefit of the blind, when he should have been fighting for the survival of those that can see. Because everyone who's blind is doomed to die.
Yeah, I think I can agree with that to a certain point. I think that in some instances, it's worth the effort to try to talk to the blind, because there were a few blind characters, I would say, brought value to the group, you know, like the...
Sure. And there's always an exception to the rule, and it sounds
Absolutely.
really harsh to say. But this, this puts us in the Beadley Lot's pragmatic view of the new society, where it's like we can afford to sustain X number of blind, the majority of which are women, because blind women will have sighted children. But we can't afford to take on the kind of numbers of blind that Coker's referring to in his altruistic view of, I'm going to assign 30 blind people to one sighted person, and that sighted person will be chained to two blind people.
Isn't that all too rich?
Yeah, no, it's great. It's this blind altruism that literally chains us to collectivism, like the betterment of the collective. The question is, like, who's your collective? If your collective is 30 blind people, you're gonna die. If your collective is 30 sighted people and 10 blind, you're gonna survive.
The principle is that you can only have so many dependents before the entire ship sinks. It's same with immigration. You can't save everybody. You can't let everybody in, or else that destroys the country. It's the same thing here.
And on top of the blind issue, there's this corrosive ideology that seeks to make more blind and to feed upon the blind as a means of sustenance, to then go forward and feed on more blind. And that's why I equate the Triffids to this weird Luciferian neo-Marxist, fill in the blank. But for some reason, like, this idea of inverted collectivism is permeating society like a disease, like a man-eating mutant plant. It's not natural. Collectivism only makes sense when you are a tribe that is truly a collective. But this forced collectivism, knocking people out, chaining them to the blind, like, that's only going to end in death, and does in this book. Starvation, disease, other predatory human beings. Like, there's so many things that you become vulnerable to when you are coerced into working for a blind collective.
Yeah, absolutely. One thing that about is, as far as the relationship to the seeing and the blind, is kind of 2 points, and that's the when talking to people, you notice that a lot of people aren't really interested in talking about real stuff, like what's really going on, things that affect them in politics. And if they do bring up politics, it's usually surface level regurgitated information that was handed down to them. And once you go a little deeper and try to explain some of the realer things that kind of affect them, either directly or down the chain, a lot of times they're not interested, and they kind of bring you back to that quote. Ever since I went through the book, it's that quote, "Damn it, can't you see that I'm blind?" Like, I don't want to hear that right now. I don't want to talk about that right now. And I noticed that's a common thing amongst normies. It's kind of like they only really want to tune in to what's going on during the election season and during the or even for the right. It's kind of like they only tune in for the FJB. Let's go Brandon, or did you hear what Nancy Pelosi said today, or outrage porn kind of stuff. But it's like, dude, it's a little deeper than that. Like, Trump isn't your he isn't your savior. There's some things about him, and they don't want to hear that. They want to shut you down. Like,
yeah, you mentioned this, Blake, recently on one of our prolific phone calls, where you had gone into a conservative group, and they were all talking about inflation and Biden, and you raised the point that, like, hey, 40% of US dollars were printed, even though it's by the Fed. They did it under Trump's watch, and then they swarmed you.
Yeah, it was a really funny dynamic hearing that, because how far they were from the target ideology that was supposed to be stamped into their existence, their belief system. They all claim to be free thinkers, and they resist that, but it's almost like a girlfriend who left a bad relationship, and from that point on, that bad relationship is how she compares all things moving forward, instead of like looking at the new thing as a new thing, and let's examine this because this could go bad or this could be great. It's about the agency and insistence on seeing. That's one thing out of the book I did notice from Bill Mason, and this kind of represents another point that kind of stuck out to me. I don't know about you, but have you, like, for most of your life, felt like you were kind of missing the light show? At the beginning of the book, how they were like all excited about this light show that was going on, and Bill Mason was the only one who was missing out. And it's kind of like ooh and ahs and all the, like, you got to see this, man, and he can't, because only due to the fact that he worked in that occupation, and that led him to be temporarily blind, kind of like guys like me or you are, like, we're busy working, so we don't have time to kind of watch all this ooh and ah stuff. So we haven't really grown up in the same culture that a lot of people that we're surrounded by have, to kind of get the perspective on life. It's like this kind of locked, fixed in kind of perspective. If you're a black man at my age, you have to be a Democrat. You have to have a ridiculous mistrust for white people as a whole.
Yeah, well, and now we'd call it the institution of whiteness.
Yeah, Yeah.
which is Western society as a whole, which makes you vulnerable, blinded to the real threat, which is giant walking mutant man-eating plants, which is this ideology that will consume you. It will grind you up like Boxer in Animal Farm.
Yeah.
The beginning is interesting because Bill Mason's blinded by a Triffid in the beginning, almost blinded. He's miraculously saved. And that metaphor, if we can extend it, sort of like your first red pill, where you see the crack in reality. So reality hits you, but it's like a real event that inoculates you to reality. It's like, so you're blind for a moment, your worldview is shattered, and you're in limbo. But then you regain your sight, and everything makes sense again. And you understand that the real threat are the Triffids as a metaphor. And you're trying to tell everybody, look, it's the Triffids, I'm telling you. It's them, that's a real threat. Everyone's saying, no, it's not, we're talking about. And this is the problem with the sight thing, is that every encounter in the beginning with the blinded and people who can't see, it's either the blinded are basically detained by, no, I'll say it this way. The people who can see are detained by the blinded and used as props to feel around. That's how we meet Josella, who's captured by this blinded man, and Bill saves her. Or the other option is that the man who can see, the person who can see, they lead the blinded flock. And then we see Bill Mason take the third option. I'm going to pretend to be blinded because there's no benefit to me, because they will tear me down or I will be anchored by them. So why, if I don't know what's going on, why take that risk? Why don't I see what's going on here and pretend to be one of them? It's sort of like, should I be dishing out these red pills to everybody, or should I just stay silent and walk away, pretend to be one of them?
Yeah, until you can get away from the throng, until you can get away from the danger, just pretend to be one of them, but keep moving away from the city center.
Yes, one blinded person is not much of a threat, but a giant group of them, that's a mob.
1,000 angry, frightened, hungry, blinded people. Like if you find yourself in the middle of that group and they discover you can see, it's over.
Yeah, that's kind of heavy. Looking at how it is now, like, you know, they just won't leave you alone. They want these policies because we got to look out for the collective health of us all. So, you know, one sick man is everyone's infection, so we got to kind of work together. But if you do the things that you can to kind of separate yourself from the flock, like, you know, well, I work by myself, so I'm not doing that at my company, or I only have 50 guys here and they all work individually, so I'm not enforcing that here. It's like the government. It's like, no. There's no outs. You know, we're gonna sick OSHA on you.
Yeah, they'll keep finding ways. They'll keep finding new instruments to try and to beat around until they get to every individual as a whole. Like right now, at the time of this recording, the OSHA mandate is in limbo, judicially speaking. But I mean, they're going to keep working down from over 100 employees, then it's going to be over 50, then it's going to be over 10, then it'll be every individual. They'll find a way. It's slow, like the Triffids, but it is coming for you. And that's why I say, like, there's nowhere to run. There's no escape. Going back to this Triffids analogy as an ideology, it needs you to survive. It needs you living and free as its food. And only after you are not living nor free can it move on.
Do not look at the light show if the radio is telling you to everybody to look at the light show. I mean, like in the beginning, we think that we talk about being blinded, but when those people have their sight, they were already blinded in the first place. They weren't thinking for themselves. They all were looking up into the sky. It's like, let's look at the light show. Let's have fun.
Yeah, no, that's a great example, man.
And the government, who are supposed to protect them from a possible satellite weapon, who probably made these weapons, they told everybody to look up, enjoy the show.
Yeah, there was a section early on in the book where a radio announcer was saying, this light show is so brilliant. For many of us, this is the reason we're alive, to look up and see these lights. And that is to die slowly after looking at this light show. So to Synthesist's point, don't look up. It's great. I love it. And, you know, it is hard, too, because a lot of us have family members who've been blinded by the light.
Oh, yeah.
And, you know, that's where it's like when it comes home to you like that. Because in this book, everyone who can see is largely atomized, disconnected. They don't have wives. They don't have children. Josella had a dad and, you know, domestic staff, but they died right away. You know, in reality, it's a little more complicated than that. Like, you've got a wife, you've got children, you've got a mom and a dad, you've got aunts and uncles, you've got a girlfriend, boyfriend, fill in the blank. you have people that you care about that have been blinded by the light, it would be difficult to either literally or metaphorically walk away from that. But then it goes down to the altruism versus pragmatism. Like if you look at it using the lens of truth and fiction, what we do here is use fiction to sort of have a conversation about truth. I mean, that becomes really difficult.
Well, I think that's the struggle, and I think it feels a little hopeless at times because of the temperature is being turned up on us right now. You know, if you look at the frog in the boiling water kind of thing, they're turning the temp up a bit or a lot, and so it feels like you're running out of time. But like I said before, and Fatty mentioned about, you know, don't look at the lights. It seems like for guys who are busy or live some kind of extraordinary life, you know, you kind of by default miss the light show because you're a different kind of thinker. And if you look at some of the characters in the book, even ones we don't agree with, most of those, like Bill, Coker, Josella, a lot of these people miss the light show because of their interesting, extravagant lifestyle. You know, Bill Mason's a biologist working with an alien plant. You know, Josella, I think, what was she doing the night before?
She was an author, and she had gone to one of her funny parties, and she suspected somebody had spiked the punch, as it were, and she had a vicious hangover. So she took sleeping pills and just slept through the day.
Yep, and then Coker was out doing, involved in some kind of protest that got broken up. So you know, they kind of all lived on their own beat to begin with, you know, because Mason's dad wanted him to be an accountant or something like that, but that wasn't his route, you know. He had a thing for biology, which led him to building his resistance from the beginning. That first thing with the Triffid out in the yard is one of the things that built his resistance, because Bill was hit by these things several times throughout the story, even after the hospital. I remember him being hit and those sacs were depleted, but had that been somebody that don't have the tolerance, that might have knocked them out like it knocked Bill out the first time, you know?
Yep. Yeah.
So that's kind of where I was bringing it to, looking at missing the light show your whole life, like that kind of feeling, because I kind of grew up feeling like that, like everybody else is doing this thing, and even though I do appreciate who I am and how I think and why I can't be an agreeable personality like I want to be and like I strive to be, I kind of always end up coming at disagreement with the groups I'm involved with because I want to go this way.
It's not contrarian. It's not contrarianism, and it's not contrarian for contrarian's sake. It's just I want to go this way. Like I feel pulled in this direction, so I'm going to go that way regardless of the consensus. Which I think, you know, I find more and more in these circles, like there are a lot of disagreeable individuals. And I mean that in the best possible way. I mean, there are some contrarians, but there are also people who are just like, I have a belief system. I don't care what's in the sky. Like, I'm going to sleep tonight.
Yeah, I think it's important to be humble about this because all these characters, they just happen to not look at the light show. It was just by chance. It wasn't because they had some special insight at all. It was all by chance. So even on our side, we might think we have this sight. Everyone does. Everyone believes they see things truly. But we have to remember that we might be blinded too. I mean, you can't see what you can't see.
Yeah, you can't see what you can't see. You don't know what you don't know. And I really appreciate you raising that point because I do struggle with use of the term like normie or, you know, that sort of thing because there's, and this was an issue that I ran into with a couple of my friends that fell into like the QAnon thing where they start, like they develop this weird arrogance about these ideas that they have, the special, the other, like I'm in the know. I know more than you, I know better. Like if you didn't realize this, if you're not awake, then you're asleep. It's this weird arrogance that does not serve us. So it's like Fatty said, really important to be humble because a lot of times you are a product of chance. It's not because you're special, it's because you were lucky.
Yes, a lot of these blinded people, they're not necessarily evil. Everyone has their faults, right?
Yes.
But also doesn't mean you have to save them either.
Yeah, it's not, you know, and it's not their fault. A lot of these, like you just said, the blind looking up, like, of course, you see an amazing light show, comet debris in the sky. It's amazing. For any of you who've ever seen some sort of celestial phenomena or the northern lights, like, you can't not look. It's not their fault. They believe in a convention that was a lie to begin with, but they didn't have the truth. Thus, they did not know it was a lie.
Absolutely. I agree with that, and I hope that to other people listening, it don't come off that way. But I do like to say that a lot of it is luck, and I like to call it grace. I do believe that some people are just fortunate enough to be born in a certain geographic area that has, rights to that water, proximity to that water. Some born in the desert. So, a lot of fortunate people are fortunate in a lot of ways, and a lot of people are unfortunate in some ways. But yeah, definitely being humble about those fortunes and being understanding that those who don't, you could work something out, and that's kind of like where Bill, once he's finally at Churning, it's kind of like you working it out with the blind. It's a choice to help these people and work with them.
It's also it's who you choose to associate with. So Bill does near the end go to Churning in the Sussex Downs, where Gisela and he talked about going. Like it's their Idaho, and they finally get out there, and there are already blind people there, but they're blind people that they know and choose to associate with. And then they work it out within that closed community. They work out a way to make it work. And that's grown organically, it's grown naturally. It's not being chained by a centralized administrator. It's a choice. And that's possible for all of us. We can support blind people, but it has to be our choice. It has to be people that want to work. And in that community in Churning, the blind gentleman who owns the place started reading Braille. He wasn't going to let himself be kept down by his blindness. He worked out a system. He knew where everything was. He started inventing protective gear, things he could do with his hands. He tried to adapt. And that's the problem that we're seeing with a lot of blind people in society. They don't want to adapt. They want you, a sighted person, to adapt to their lifestyle.
Yes. On the point about luck, Peter Thiel often says that luck is an atheist word for God. And that's so very important to remember. It's that you're given these gifts and you can still be useful to these blinded people. And it's your choice to who to associate with. Like the character of the old guy, he's trying to survive. He's trying to see as best as he can given his ailments. And when Bill and Gisela finally reach there, they bring in their experiences from failed past attempts to work something out. Like this is jumping a bit around a bit, but with can't remember the woman character.
Miss Durant, the religious woman?
Yes, Miss Durant. Yes. We have this woman character in there that who Coker talks to, and he's asking them, like, why didn't they turn on the lights? Why didn't they try the lights at all? And they're trying to reason that, well, it's not within our ideology. That means we're going to be going down the steps of what brought destruction in the first place. So why would we do that? And what finally gets pointed out is that they seem like they're trying, but they're really not. They're willfully ignorant again. Like, although they can see and they're trying to rebuild, they're making the same principal mistake, which is that they're not really willing to help themselves as best as they can.
Yeah, they're blinded by their ideology.
Yeah, that's the point I was getting to about, the you have to have the compassion, but at the same time you have to be able to know when it's time to shake some weight, because you got the blind guy Dennis that you were just talking about, the owner of the farm. And you got him from day one. He already built that mesh suit, and I think by like day 2 or 3 he done already ventured out to the village.
Yep, he found a way. He adapted. He brought some string, and sort of tied string together after string and string after string, because you're not going to keep me down. Like, I've suffered this calamity, but I'm not going to stop innovating.
Absolutely, and that's something that I think should be expected out of society. If there's any top-down kind of ideology or belief system that you could share and even push on to others, not force, but push, shamelessly push, like an attitude of, no, get up. Life is hard, and one thing this book points out to me, it sometimes brings me in a certain kind of mood, being a father and someone who has other people that I'm responsible for, and worrying about trying to provide for them in a society that doesn't have a system in which you can work to earn and make a living and get the food. You go back to more primitive and all the things they have to fight against, and all that stuff is hard, and it's easy for a blind person in that situation to give up, but it's just as hard for a person who can see to give up. And that point that Coker, I can see myself being in that mood sometimes, because I'm that way with my kids. I got all girls and I'm soft on them to a certain extent, but whenever there's a point of their ability that I know that's their limit or that's their maximum, I expect that. And anytime they try to shortchange that, those are the times when I'm usually hard on them, kind of like how Coker kind of laid into that lady. Like, look, he's telling her in a very harsh way. He's, all gas with it, no tact.
Right.
But the overall point he's trying to make is like, look, you have the brains, you have the capacity, your life depends on it.
You're leaning on a dated convention out of convenience because the future is frightening. Having, like, for a girl who grew up in a finishing school, going to get a dance theory degree, suddenly has to learn how an engine works. That's very frightening. And the society that she grew up in catered to her disbelief. And so she leaned on that. So the disbelief became convenient. Because if I don't have to try, then I don't have to fail. And now a new paradigm has come about, which is failure means death. But you're leaning on an old system that means failure means, some guy will come along and do it for you. Some member of the poisonous patriarchy, toxic masculinity will come and fix it for you. But that's not how things are anymore. Things are now like, if you don't turn the lights on, you're not going to be able to see. You will be willfully blind in this case.
That's interesting. It's kind of like, I kind of question now, like, what do you think they're going to do, or who do you think they're going to go after once they've used all of the useful up with kind of these men?
I think they'll go after the concept of usefulness itself. The role of a man and a woman, the role of marriage they'll go after. Like, why do we even need marriage? Why not? We're reading Plato in book club and Plato's Republic, and down the line, Plato suggests this idea of communal wives and communal children. It's kind of like, what worth is marriage to this society when everybody belongs to everybody else? There's communal collectivism that may be redundant, but this communal collectivism, I think they'll go after the conventions of relationship entirely. So the only relation that will exist is your relationship to the state, to the world state. Does that answer your question, or am I just splitting off into a wild sputtering mess?
No, that's clear. It's as you once said, it's parasitical.
Yeah.
There'll always be something to go after.
Well, and do you notice, like, I made that point with the Triffids being, it's an ideology, it's representative of an ideology that's parasitic. So what happens, as you said, when the Triffids have eaten all the living beings? What happens to this ideology when all the useful people are consumed? What does it go after next? Because it's parasitic, so it needs a convention to dismantle, to invert, in order to survive. So some of you may be Christian, some of you may be not, but there's this idea in Revelation of just sort of dismantling the calendar, dismantling how we perceive time or how we measure time as a society, how we measure husbands and wives, like what we eat. So the Antichrist in this book of Revelation, you're not going to be able to get married anymore. You're going to have to abstain from certain foods. In my impression, it's going to be meat largely. Like, the whole meaning of human existence is going to be turned on its head in favor of this ideology. So that's going off on a kind of a weird tangent, but Blake raises an interesting question when he asks, when all the useful people are used up, what's next?
That's a really frustrating dynamic there,
Yeah, as soon as you cease to be useful, you'll be rendered down for your base elements. Like, we'll use your fat to grease our chariot wheels.
Your bank accounts, all your assets,
Everything.
Yeah, that's kind of messed up, man. That's like some double rape right there with the the further inheritance tax, and then like the death tax, which is the inheritance tax, but like the capital gain stuff.
Or for now, they're the same tax. But soon you will be taxed for dying. And everything you leave behind will be taxed again after a lifetime of tax. And then there will probably be an inheritor's inheritance tax. So after it's like, it keeps happening. I mean, California right now is talking about doubling their taxes. And it is so absurd because we've gone through two of the hardest years for the United States economy, and legislative bodies, they're talking about doubling taxes. I mean, you guys,
Dude, they're even taxing. They want you. They will tax you to leave when you try to leave Cali. They tax they post like post tax.
They're doing retroactive taxes, or they're talking about it. I don't know if this is. I don't know where this is at, but there has been talk of if you lived in California in like the last 3 to 5 years and you've left since then, like they can go back and open the books and say, well, we are retroactively imposing a tax on you because you lived here 3 years ago. So you owe us tax money. And it's like, dude, I haven't lived there in 3 years. Like I've been making money in Wisconsin. I don't owe you anything. I'm like, well, yeah, I mean, you lived here 3 years ago. So yeah, let us get our beaks wet with that new income that you've got there in Wisconsin.
When you give up your citizenship in the United States, you still have to pay taxes to the federal government.
For how long?
Forever.
So I could move to Montenegro, burn my passport, renounce my citizenship, and I'm still on the hook for US IRS?
Yes. And you're going to tax for moving to a racist place.
Oh.
I mean, it's got Negro in the title, right? What's wrong with you?
I pay that tax gladly.
Dude, how how are they able to collect though? What's the mechanism and what gives them the ability to collect if you leave? And
Interpol? I don't know. Probably,
yeah.
There's probably a way they can do it. I'm sure U.S. State Department could find some official in Montenegro that's gonna put the squeeze on you.
Mm-hmm.
So what Fatty just pointed out is like this growth of the global state, the big Triffid, as it were.
That's a metaphor. Sorry for cutting off, but that's a metaphor with torrents at the end. Or even if you live in this small farm with the small community you have, they're still going to try to come and use you. You're still going to be a drain of everything. They're going to take away somebody so that you have to listen to them, which is Susan, the little girl character.
Yeah, the sighted little girl that Bill picks up later in the book. He comes across a 9-year-old girl whose whole family was killed, but she can see, and she's been alone. And Bill picks her up and takes her to Cherning, and they essentially become a family. And at the end of the book, this man Torrance joins some sort of neo-feudal collective who is establishing themselves through military power, through strength, through coercion, as the British authorities. And so they start driving around trying to find these communities and going in there and sort of reallocating who's who and where on this assumption of power. So he comes in there, there's 3 sighted people and 6 blind people. And he said, that's too many. Every sighted person needs to look after 10 blinded people. And there's too many sighted people. So we're gonna take your 12-year-old girl away from you and put her somewhere else because we're the authority. And this is, I know Fatty hates this, but I sort of compare this to a lot of the new rise of authoritarianism on the right, in that we sort of have this idea of we need a king. This sort of encompasses some of the neo-reactionary guys, and this idealizing an authoritarian system on their political spectrum, on their political favoritism. And this is what it would look like in reality, though. It would be unelected warlords coming to your home, walking through your door with guns and saying, this is the way it's gonna be. We are the lords, you are the serfs. If you listen to what we say, we'll give you a little taste. But we're taking your wife, we're taking your children to allocate as we see fit.
Yeah, and the one big resistance I have to that that kind of thinking on the right, whether it be some of the pro-black types or even the the neo, whatever you want to call them,
Neo-feudalists?
Yeah, neo-feudalists. It's samurais or some shit, man. Like, it's like they everybody's searching for this like grand solution to something outside of just doing the right thing, like doing what.
Yeah, this fix-all. They're looking for a system that creates a fix-all.
Yeah, and it's just like it always goes right back into the same shit. So, the governments at the time at the beginning of the book, which would be the prequel of the book, talking about the origin of the Triffids to begin with, the origin of the comet storms to begin with. I definitely believe that some government made those Triffid seeds at some point, and it kind of loses.
Well, yeah, it was. Yeah, in the very beginning, it suggested that they were made in a Soviet laboratory.
Yeah,
these are Soviet inventions.
Yeah, it was made in Wu-Tang. It was made in the lab in Wu-Tang. But it's kind of like You go through, like Dennis said, we went through all this, and this guy, 5 minutes in, this guy's proposing a war, and it's kind of like, it's the same thing. It always goes in that cycle, like everything but the right thing. We're always reacting to something versus like dealing with that thing. Right now on the pro-black mild to pro-black like hot, if you can look at it in degrees, there's all this, what they all have in common is this like resistance towards alliances. It's kind of like, now if it was just simply like separatist, then I can respect that. Like, you want to go off and do your own thing. But it's kind of like more like, we resent them because of this situation over years that they've put us in. We don't even belong here. This ain't even our land. Instead of just separating, going off and doing your own thing, like fine, go ahead and do that. Liberia's taking, they taking people in. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So,
yeah,
but
they need workers. They need taxpayers.
Yeah,
They need fodder for the next coup.
Yeah, it's just kind of like, instead of like deal with the issues at hand, in a real way, it's kind of like, let's just do more dissent. Let's not participate, instead of separating and going off and do your own thing. It's more like let's just not participate. Let's just stand here in the middle of the game while everybody's playing ball and not play. And and I see it on the far right too. It's kind of like reactionary, because the media and the government are kind of pandering to it's kind of like the little brother and the big brother thing. When the mom spoils the shit out of the younger brother, who does the older brother end up resenting? Because the older brother's always the one getting chastised, because he's expected to be great because he's the oldest. He's expected to be mature, and the little brother always gets a pass, and eventually the big brother strikes back, Joseph kind of thing, so, throw him in a hole.
Well, do Cain and Abel. Like,
yeah.
Well, Fatty said something really interesting recently, and we can apply it to what's happening in this world in the book Day of the Triffids, of societal collapse for whatever reason. It's an amalgamation. It's a perfect storm of things. And I see this in our society, economy, pandemic, the violent armed insurrection of January 6th. All sorts of things are going wrong in society. And when push comes to shove, all theory falls by the wayside. That's what Fatty said. And it's a good point, because in this book, there are several different proposals for rebuilding society. We talked about Torrance and his neo-feudalism system. Miss Durant we talked about, and her sort of religious Luddite approach, and Michael Beadley and his pragmatic reapproach, revaluation of what it's going to take to rebuild society. There's an old man in that story that says this. Excuse me one moment while I pull it up. Page 67. The conditions which framed and taught us our standards have gone. Our needs are now different, so our aims must be different. If you want an example, I would point out to you that we have all day spent indulging with perfect easy consciences in what 2 days ago would have been considered housebreaking and theft. With the old pattern broken, we have now to find out what mode of life is best suited to the new. We have not simply to start building again, we have to start thinking again, which is much more difficult and far more distasteful.
That's one of my favorite monologues in the book there.
Yeah, he's claiming, and I encourage anyone who hasn't read it to read it, because there are a few speeches, as Blake mentioned, including this one, that make this book, that stick with you. And this is the one that stuck with me. And we have to look at our beliefs in the past and ask, are they suited to the reality of the future? And that takes us back to Fatty's quote, when push comes to shove, all theory falls by the wayside.
Yes, no plan survives on first contact. It's always good to have a plan, but don't expect it to work out completely perfectly. It's never like that.
Yeah,
you always need to adapt to reality, and with experience, you will adapt better. It's never this perfect thing that works I'm being inarticulate right now, but it never works perfectly. Never goes according to plan.
Well, as my main man Mike Tyson said, everybody has a plan until they get punched in the face.
Yeah, everyone likes to think that they're not a thief, they don't steal. But in that one example with in the beginning where you have this woman with her child and this man who's walking around and they break into a window to get food. And they say it like doesn't seem right. But then if the man says, but we need food, right? We need to eat. So what are you gonna do? And she still says it doesn't seem right, but in a lower voice, with less resolve. So reality makes you change your perception, makes you change your theories, makes you change your morality. That's reality. You adapt to the situation.
Yeah, for better or worse, it kind of make you question things a little harder when you kind of try to put yourself in those places because you never really know until you're there 5 days without eating. Can you really have the resolve to do the right thing if the only thing that was standing in the way of you in a meal was somebody else's meal? You know, that's kind of the place I always hope that we never get to again in man's history, because we've done so much to build us to the position of being able to come up with all these ideas and think about these different philosophies and, you know, moral ideas because we've been provided the time. They mentioned that in the book. I forgot who spoke about it. It was either Coker or somebody mentioned about, you know, we need to be able to have enough people and enough time to kind of get people to not have to work all the time. We need to build.
Yeah, we need leisure time we need time to think. So there are people in these societies, and don't let Bucklander hear this, that can't be perceivably productive. There are guys that just need time to think about new ideas and innovations, and that comes with leisure time. Because if we are engaged 100% of our time in working to try and get food, the society will decline because there's no time for learning. And every subsequent generation is going to get dumber and dumber. We need time for thinkers. But I'm going to end this with this quote from the same speech that the old man gives on page 68. In this time now ahead of us, a great many of these prejudices we have been given will have to go, or be radically altered. We can accept and retain only one primary prejudice, and that is that the race is worth preserving. To that consideration, all else will, for a time at least, be subordinate. We must look at all we do with this one question in mind. Is this going to help our race survive, or will it hinder us? If it will help, we must do it, whether or not it conflicts with the ideas in which we were brought up. If not, we must avoid it, even though the omission may clash with our previous notions of duty and even justice.
On the point about leisure time, it's that there's a balance to strike there where it was also the leisure time that allowed these thinkers to come up with these satellite weapons and to enhance the Triffids that caused this disaster in the first place. But you also can't do without them if you want to live with any type of luxury, to go beyond being subsistent farmers.
Yeah, it's a difficult balance to strike because you're definitely right. I mean, we're living through a quote-unquote pandemic right now that was brought about by leisure time, by funding and scientists who got bored trying to cure the common cold, so decided to make a super disease instead.
And the disease, all it does is expose our weakness, because who does the disease affect? Obese, out-of-shape people, old people, people who are weak, and shows a lot of these things are man-made in the first place. It wouldn't be as deadly if there weren't these obese people running around.
Also, more good reason for people to use their eyes. You gotta see to be able to stop some of these things. If you are blessed with living in a so-called republic, democratic republic, where you have some say and oversight, you know, sometimes you have to hold people accountable and check the blueprints. You have to force, and it takes a society of people to actually see, to be able to know to look for those things, to know to check for an audit or question how do we get an audit on where the money's been spent, or what is this NIH thing and what do they research, or what do the CIA really do? You know, what have they done for us lately? You know, those kind of questions. you got enough people seeing to be able to raise those kind of questions en masse, you kind of get a society of people who are used to asking those questions if we keep practicing that instead of being blind with leisure.
Yeah, anybody have any closing thoughts here?
Not really closing, but I just thought that the COVID thing is actually, there's a close metaphor to the Triffids thing, right?
Sure.
Because the comet, the light show, that's like obesity, and the Triffids, that's COVID. It's the perfect storm.
Yeah, and they never told us to get healthy. They just told us to get out. Well, I'd like to thank everyone for joining us. I encourage you to read the book, either buy it or check out the audiobook. It's excellent. It's a fun read. It's about 8 hours for the audiobook. Blake and I probably listen to this audiobook once every 6 months to a year. And we talk about it all the time, and we've talked about it for what, like almost 10 years at this point?
Has it been 10? Oh, yeah, probably.
I don't know, man. My concept of time is to the wind. But yeah, we'd like to thank IronAgeArchive.com. Encourage you to join, check it out, check out the Discord. Thank you, everyone, and we'll see you next time.